Hello, I'm Arthur, and this is Spiraled Honking ASMR. I am so happy with the name. Took me at least 2 years to finally figure out what I wanted to do with my channel. And now that I'm starting to put it together, I realized I needed to be more authentic. So today I am going to be talking about my experiences with D.I.D and comorbidity and what that is like as a neurodivergent person who has multiple neurodivergencies. But I am using tarot to help me organize my thoughts. So I am also offering this video up to the collective of individuals who may be system pluralities or other neurodivergent people. It is not a typical tarot reading. It is also not a typical ASMR yapping video. So I'm offering this video up as a gift to these intersecting communities that I belong to, because I have realized that in order for me to be authentic and actually enjoy making my content and be able to help people, I need to feel like I can be myself. And I can't do that without being honest with the fact that I have DID. And before we get into the actual meat of the video, I wanted to clarify one of the main thoughts that has led me to this point. When it comes to authenticity within this community, it is very difficult. And a common thing that you hear is that they must be stronger than me. And what I mean by that is I've heard several systems talk about systems who post within the context of they're stronger than me because they post, because of the amount of internet hate that you get when you are honest with what this disability is and looks like to an individual. Because our body is an individual. And so our individual experience as a system is going to be different than somebody else's individual experience. And it is always hard to explain these things because when you are a system, you have these multiple coexisting identities. And it doesn't matter that I am officially diagnosed. There are going to be people fake claiming me. And I know this because there have been YouTubers that I have watched for many years that were officially diagnosed, that were fake claimed. And I was thinking about this. And I was having a conversation with one of my alternates, and essentially they asked me, like, what is the difference between our acceptance and identity around autism and our acceptance and identity around DID and being a system? Because we know that we have been a system as long as we can remember. And it kind of clicked into place for me that I was viewing my diagnosis of autism that I've had since I was 17 differently than I was viewing my diagnosis of DID. So with autism, I know for a fact that I have autism, that I have autism spectrum disorder. I know that even though I can speak, that I am a nonverbal autistic, and that no matter how much I try to explain to somebody who hasn't done the research that nonverbal is a spectrum within autism as well, that they're not going to believe me, because I've had that experience my entire life where still in today's society, autism is so intensely infantilized as a diagnosis that if you do not have obvious intellectual disabilities, people dismiss that you have it. And I've known since I was 12 that I had autism. And I tried desperately to tell my parents and my doctors, and instead, no one listened to me until I was 17. And then my pediatrician finally listened because she realized that all of the experiences that she was previously diagnosing with other things actually were autism related. And even though she diagnosed me when I was 17, she still did not take back the other diagnoses she gave me. And because she, as a doctor, chose not to do that and continued to prescribe me antipsychotics that I did not need, I, to this day, suffer from tardive dyskinesia. I have dealt with medical neglect and medical misogyny my entire life. So, what makes my experience with autism different than my experience with DID? And when I finally understand something, when I finally have a conclusion, it is always kind of hard to explain to my therapist or the people in my life how that conclusion came to place, because it is a series of building blocks that leads to that tower moment that I'm having. And I'm looking at my journal here because I'm wondering where exactly I should start after getting to my point. Um, I have several neurodivergencies, and I feel like I have to explain that to get to my point. So I have ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, synesthesia, and OCD. I also have ASP, which is highly sensitive person. And something my therapist pointed out, because that was actually one of my first diagnoses when I was 13 or 12 ish. Something my therapist pointed out to me was highly sensitive people is, even though it can be, or how do I say this? I was unaware that this was a diagnosis because I always felt like the term was synonymous with hypochondriac or being overdramatic, because my father always called me a highly sensitive person, and sensitive was an insult in my household. So I was under the assumption that it was a dismissal of my truth as an autistic person. And my therapist agreed with me essentially, and he also was like, yeah, it makes sense that you didn't realize it was a diagnosis, because there are a lot of medical professionals who use it as a umbrella diagnosis to dismiss autistic individuals. And this video later will kind of go into comorbidity medically and neurodivergently, if that makes sense, about my experience with having multiple neurodiversities, as well as the physical conditions I have. But the reason I'm bringing this up is to my point. Because of my experience with synesthesia, it's very difficult for me to explain to people how things finally click into place, how I finally understand and come to a conclusion on something that I have been considering for a very long time. Hold on. So, the way I explained it to my therapist is, when I come to a conclusion, it is not just a mental recognition. It is a physical sensation throughout my body that I can also experience a sound when I come to the conclusion. And the reason that's significant is because I also recently realized that as a person with D.I.D, I do not have an inner monologue. My entire life, I thought that I did. I don't. Instead, if we ever hear ourselves thinking, it's because what we deem our corporeal form in the inner world, how we perceive our body in the inner world as an altar, that version of us is speaking out loud to themselves in the inner world, or they are speaking to another alternate. If that's not happening, if there is not a conversation, either out loud to ourselves in the inner world or to another alternate in the inner world, there's nothing. Passive, constant, passive observation. And so when we come to a conclusion, it's very similar, unless we're having a conversation with somebody. And even when we are, it's not necessarily like an actual full, concrete, legible thought. There's several conclusions we've been coming to recently as a system, but more specifically me as the host. I'm not really sure if like I feel comfortable explaining who I am. Our singular, our singlet, our individual human, like there's a lot of words for it, our single sona, as a lot of people call it. The name that we've chosen for ourselves as a body is Arthur, because it means courage. And I guess like that's all I feel comfortable about saying when it comes to me. But as the host, when I have these conclusions, when I'm having these conversations with the alternate versions of myself, because like that's kind of what we prefer is alternate. Like we're teammates, but we're also, the way we think of it is we're also the same person, just a different version of that person. I might later make a video about that. And so some people, to clarify, some people might be like, oh, well, you have OSDD. No. We have alters that have OSDD, but as a body, we do not have OSDD. We have D.I.D. It is officially diagnosed, but I'm not going to continue to try to, how would I say this? I'm to a point in my life where I'm done defending myself, if that makes sense. But back to the conclusions. The way I described it to my therapist, it is like a key going into a lock and finally unlocking a door. It's a very physical, spiritual, and stimuli experience. Sometimes it literally feels like a light bulb has gone off over our head, like we feel lighter, like we hear like a ding of a bell. Sometimes it is like the sound of a lock turning, and the current conclusion that I had, literally, like it wasn't a normal lock. It was one of those locks that instead of straight up and down pistons, it had curved ones where you had to like move it through like a circular lock mechanism before the key would actually go through the door. That's what it sounded like. But this conclusion happened when we were having a conversation with one of our alternates, when I, the host, was having a conversation with one of my alternates. I know that a lot of people have a issue with like the my. I mean my as in like it's in my body. We're in each other's body. We share the same body. We all say my alternate or my alter, not just me, the host. Because it's not my as in possessive, it's my as in relational, if that makes sense. But the conversation was around, again, autism versus D.I.D. Why is it so much easier to accept this diagnosis that we've known we have had so much longer versus this diagnosis that we've known we've had for a long time, but we didn't get diagnosed with it until recently. And I think part of it comes down to the OCD, but also the symptomatic doubt that you have with D.I.D. So those are like the obvious answers. But the unobvious answer is what like turns the lock, which is it's hard to accept something about yourself in a way where you are allowing other people to see this thing when you haven't actually accepted it yourself, if that makes sense. And again, that's one of the reasons it's so hard for me to communicate my thoughts to other people, is because we do not think thoughts in words unless we were, again, having a conversation with one of ourselves inside of our head, or talking out loud to ourselves inside of our head, which usually is, I guess, the best way to explain it is because of our experience with comorbidity. Oh my God, I am already 20 minutes in and I haven't even touched the tarot yet. Holy shit. Okay, that's fine. Because of our experience with comorbidity, I've heard other systems explain this, but a lot of times these comorbid mental conditions, mental diagnoses like OCD, they manifest in the inner world as like physical things. So when you have OCD as a system, it is apparently, I assume, significantly different than somebody who has OCD who is a singlet. Because it literally can sound like a voice inside of your head separate from yourself. And we've asked ourselves the question multiple times, like, could this be an alter that's a persecutor? And no, because the OCD thoughts come from a completely different part of our brain. They come from the part of our brain that OCD comes from. So the way we mapped our brain is based on the purposes of each part of the brain, because that's what intuitively makes the most sense to us. And we've had this inner world our whole lives that's been constantly shifting throughout our lives, but it hasn't been placed in a concrete place. And so it's been hard to explain to other versions of ourselves, as well as our therapists, like what it looks like, what's going on. And so we figured out like a more intuitive, directional way of how to set things up so that it's easier to navigate the inner world. Now, I feel like that leads to my next thoughts, which this is where I will need the tarot cards as a reference. I put them on this board here. So these are essentially to help me organize my thoughts because, like I said, I just spent 25 fucking minutes getting to my point. Well, I don't think in a linear way. I have to speak out loud to understand what I'm thinking and feeling. And I might start here, but I have to go all the way around and then come back to the axis of my point to understand what I'm trying to say. Because this is where I'm starting and this is where I'm ending up. And yeah, it's still in the same axis, but I didn't understand it at this point. But when I come around, I understand it now. I understand it now. You know, the guy who's like, I understand it now. I understand it now. I understand it now. I understand it now. Where he like throws stuff and he gets it wrong and then he like throws it again and it gets in. I feel like that's also like a really big representation of tenacity and how it presents in my life. Scientists have like talked about neuroplasticity and how when it comes to neuroplasticity, a really big thing that aids in creating neuroplasticity is trying and failing at something, trying to understand something on your own before genuinely learning about it, and then like allowing yourself to fail or make mistakes, and then actually learning how to do it the right way. And I've had many conversations with my partner about that, which leads to the lesson in self-confidence that I wanted to talk about. But the lesson in self-confidence that I have connects to learning how to validate your own identity, which kind of leads back to everything I've been talking about so far. So, like, do you see what I mean by spiral? This is just how I think and understand things. So, the first thing we have here is the chariot, this one at the top. Now, the chariot is all about movement and force. But what's interesting about the position that I got it in is it means kind of the opposite. It's about slowing down. Because in order to validate your own experience, you have to stop trying so hard. You have to accept yourself exactly as you are. And that's something else I want to talk about is learning how to accept yourself and love yourself exactly as you are right now. That's a big thing that I've been doing in therapy that has made my life so meaningful and helped me so deeply. In therapy, it's called radical acceptance. Okay, first of all, I just wanted to apologize if I've been too loud this entire time. I really enjoy like up close to the mic. I like the way that I have to like hold my words back a little bit so they're not so loud. I like the way I breathe when I speak like this. I really like that like gravelly sound. But I realized that once I clicked the button that I wasn't actually hearing myself. So I'm gonna bring the mic a little forward. Oh fuck. That is actually so much better because I can actually breathe. Okay, so with the chariot, and specifically because it's like this horse, it's not just the physical object of movement, it is a living, breathing thing. A horse cannot be constantly moving forward. One of the reasons that we stopped using animals as vehicles is because they have to take a break in the same way that we do. They have to be given water and food and rest. But with cars, you only have to fill up the gas tank. You only have to crank the car, which is still a term that my family uses. So like I say, we got to go crank the car. Like like if you've seen the old cars, you know what I'm talking about, the little crank in the back like um but like with horses, you have to have a relationship with them. So the movement of your life right now, of our life as a collective, is learning to have a relationship with our goals and learning how to have a relationship with our dreams and our desires, where we're not like seeing them as outside of ourselves as humans. Let me say this in another way in case somebody's struggling to understand. If you look at the horse as the movement instead of the vehicle, so the horse itself being the chariot instead of the chariot with like the horses or the sphinxes, um, the horse is the movement itself. And so, what I'm getting here is in order to have a better relationship with your dreams, your goals, and your desires, instead of seeing them outside of yourself as a inhuman object to accumulate, you need to see it as being alive, as something active, as something you have to nurture. So, therefore, by nurturing yourself, you are nurturing your relationship to your desired future and outcome. Um, and what's like, that's what I have learned about validating my own experience and moving towards my goals is I have had to learn to accommodate myself, to believe myself, to trust myself, and to stop being internally ableist. I am not a machine. I am not a vehicle. I am a majestic horse that needs to be wild and free, but I'm disabled. So I need to be resting more than other horses. You know what I mean? Like let me give you another example because I think this is important. So I see myself as a goose. Like I have several, because I am a system, there are several animals that we identify with in one way or another. But the reason I chose goose as the theme of my channel, as well as the theme of my like Discord, I'm not linking it yet. But I will eventually when I have like an actual channel with more people. But the reason I chose goose and the reason I identify with goose is because geese are both solitary creatures and social creatures. A lot of times when you see geese outside of their um, initial migration period, you only see them with their mate or their family. You don't see them with the entire flock that they migrated with. And it's because they are simultaneously solitary creatures that need their space and also creatures that need to be social. And like, I love ornithology. I love birds and I really love geese. Um I've always had a really spiritual connection to geese because I've grown up in an area that's like they migrate here a lot, and I've seen them a lot near my home and things like that. And there are plenty of birds that are like this. Birds are very intelligent. A lot of birds are very similar to humans. But I think what's interesting about geese that makes them different from cardinals or ducks or chickens, like just to give a few examples, is chickens need to be around their flock like all the time because they are very easy targets for predators. Ducks aren't necessarily easier targets in the same way that chickens are, but they are more similar to geese, but you're less likely to see ducks only with like a mate. I usually have seen them at least 3 or 5 together. I never really see ducks alone or only with their mate in the same way that I would see geese. Um, but geese, um, they are very interesting because similar to ducks and humans, they're omnivores. They can eat things like bugs, but also eat things like plants. Um, I I've literally seen people feed like geese bacon before, which don't do that. They should not be digesting fatty stuff like that. Um, Another thing that people do that they think is the right thing to do that is terrible for birds is give them bread, which, by the way, don't do that. Most birds are severely gluten intolerant. It will make them not be able to fly very well, especially ducks. But geese, back to geese, is they're very chaotic creatures. They're very capable. And a lot of people don't understand that chaos doesn't mean insanity. It means moving with the movement of life, unpredictability. Geese are very good with unpredictability because if you come up on a goose, they ain't gonna immediately attack, but they're also not gonna wait for you to hurt them either. They're very good at decision making. Not me lore dumping. Okay, but now back to the horses and the chariot, right? There's this movement. There's this validating your own reality. accepting the way that you experience things, your lived experience, right? And that leads me to the next card, Father of Wands. Now, with Father of Wands, so we have a leader. Okay, we have fire element. In this one specifically, we have lightning. So this is again about movement, right? Because electricity. Okay, stay with me, stick with me here. Oh, sorry, that was quite loud. Now, the way that I see this connecting to validating your own lived experience is this motherfucker is protecting his. Oh yeah, I have to scoot back a little bit. I keep forgetting. So he's protecting his shit. He's protecting his power, his wand, his tool. Now, that is not the only thing his power comes from, but it is a tool he uses to help direct his power, which is, I think, very significant because fire can exist on its own. Fire can exist by lightning striking a tree. Fire can exist because of like a drought and like a forest fire being created because of how like much heat there is. But the way that I see this card in this moment and how it connects to my thoughts and my experiences with validating your own reality is sometimes you have to be the person to feed your own flame. You have to be the person to keep your warmth, your hope, and your light alive. And that is different from simply surviving. And when you are dealing with life experiences where you are basically permanently in survival mode, it is difficult to validate your own experiences because you are so busy just barely surviving and staying alive. Whether that's because, one thing or another, in my experience, is because of a lot of gaslighting and denying my reality, getting my reality denied, being told that I didn't know what I was talking about, being told that I was making shit up, being told that I wasn't grateful, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't deserve love, right? But I've always known better internally. Because even through all of these trials and tribulations, I chose to fan my own flame. And that's a really hard thing to do. And that connects to resilience, and that connects to this neuroplasticity I was talking about, of constantly, trying things and failing and still trying anyway. That connects to the tenacity. And I feel like I was talking to my therapist about this, but a lot of trans people to survive have to be resilient. They have to learn resilience. And I think that people forget that even if snakes are predators, they are also something else's prey. And I don't think that people fully understand that the perfect victim is not a thing. And there are so many things that can happen in your life that cause DID. If you've ever watched the CTAC clinic, or if you've ever listened to people who have lived experience with DID, there isn't a lot of research on it, but people who actually work and listen to and with the community have noticed that, again, there is a comorbidity between multiple different types of neurodiversity and DID. Dr. Jamie Marich has talked about how a lot of clinicians within the DID community are working to get DID classified as a neurodiversity. The Cleveland Clinic, the definition that they have for neurodiversity is a non-medical term to describe people whose brain just works differently for some reason. And then the comorbidity, because I don't think I clarified the definition on that. It is medical conditions that you have in addition to a primary diagnosis. And my primary diagnosis is autism, but I think it's also DID because I have had both of those as long as I can remember. I've never had one without the other. And like the CTAC clinic has talked about, a lot of times for people who are autistic, before they have any typically accepted experiences of trauma, existing as an autistic person in and of itself leads to the creation of a system. And that's been our experience because the first moment we remember being conscious, like the first memory that we ever have, was of us being thoughts in the head of a 2-year-old human being and existing as different, smaller conscious versions of ourselves within this little 2-year-old body. We were in our grandparents' backyard and we realized we had this headspace. It was this dark space within our head. And we saw the backyard of our grandparents' backyard in Texas. And then we saw this space in our head and we saw these thoughts that were like colors and words that were trying to spell themselves out, but we didn't fully understand language at that time. We just saw it in the world around us. And so it was like these colors that were trying to exist as words and thoughts, but we couldn't fully communicate with each other. And so it was just us coming into consciousness and realizing like, oh, like I'm alive. Like I'm not just existing. Like it's hard to explain, but a lot of people who have like early childhood memory will kind of remember the moment Like, they realized, oh, I'm conscious. Like, oh, I'm thinking. Like, oh, I'm alive. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. But um I've been that way. We've been that way literally as long as we have been consciously aware of existing. Um and so what caused us to suffer from amnesia, because this is something else the CTAC clinic has talked about. A lot of people misunderstand that to have D.I.D and to be a system, the different parts have to have amnesia towards each other. That is not criteria for the diagnosis. It's not. The different parts do not have to have amnesia towards each other. That happened because of trauma. That's what happened to us because of trauma. And the CTAC clinic, what he talks about, I forget the doctor's name. What he talks about is how not only is it a criteria for a D.I.D system to be unaware of each other, to have amnesia between one each other, like that can happen, but that is not criteria for the diagnosis. It is a misconception. Again, it can happen, but it is not a necessary criteria for the diagnosis. That doesn't mean you don't have to experience amnesia. To clarify, amnesia is a part of the diagnosis, but parts not being aware of each other at all, even though it is something that can happen, it is not a necessity to the diagnosis. Don't shoot the messenger. Go watch the CTAC clinic. He's a doctor. But to get back to my point, it was further trauma, like actual recognized trauma, apart from existing. That's what caused us to stop being aware of each other as parts. I have very similar experiences to Dr. Jamie Marich, where the parts of us knew that we existed when we were younger, and it wasn't until the ridicule of other people that we stopped referring to ourselves as we and I, both, like acknowledging the different parts of us. It's taken a lot of deconstructing for me, for us, because, well, the reason I say me first and then us is because I, as the host, am not who I used to be. And it's not because the host changed, it was because of several fusions. Integration works very differently for us than how we had always understood it to be. And like integrations, fusions, they work very differently for us than how we had ever understood it to be for other systems. We were unaware for the majority of our lives that fusions and integration don't have to be permanent. Integration doesn't have to mean that other part of you stops existing. It can be as simple as you now understand the lessons that that other part of you has learned. And fusion can be as simple as kind of like a nesting doll, where you share a body, you share what we call the inner world, is because this is our body. So in the inner world, we call the versions of us as alters, we call them corporeal forms, our internal corporeal form. And then, so like if there is an integration where an alter is no longer an individual in the inner world, but they go into everyone, we call that a discorporation. And so that is how we have always kind of visualized what fusion looks like to other people, is that part goes into the system as a whole. That's how we always saw it. So we thought that was the only way it existed, but that has not been our experience. We have struggled with gender our whole life as a system, and we've come to the conclusion as a system that the body itself is transgender. And so I, as the host, I am a fusion of several other regular hosting parts, because we don't traditionally have one host. We traditionally have several parts that have more structurally sound identities and philosophies, and just like ways of being. They are more structurally sound, and they host regularly. And then the other less structurally sound parts will pop in here and there when they want to or when they need to. I'm getting sidetracked by this because D.I.D and learning about it and talking about it has been very beneficial to us, and it is one of our not only special interests but hyperfixations. We are very hyper focused and interested in this condition and how it affects us, because it has benefited our life so much to accept this about ourselves, that we have this condition. It has made our life so much more fulfilling, and it has made my communication with myself and my partner so much better. I think it's good to get into the hangman now. Now, the hangman is important to the topic of identity, but it is also important to the last topic of validating your own reality and defending yourself and what's important to you. And that connects back to the Father of Wands, being this leader for yourself, being parenting yourself, right? Taking care of yourself, and why that's important. What I didn't understand for a really long time is, so something my parents and specifically my father used to do all the time is he used to use therapy speak against me a lot as a form of, control, manipulation, but specifically to invalidate my experience. Something he used to tell me all the time was, you are playing the victim. You have victim mentality. You are stuck in victim mentality. And a lot of my old identities existed around the things my father used to tell me constantly. And so the hangman to me, um what it literally represents is martyrdom, self-sacrifice. And to me, it is sacrificing your old identity in attempts to be someone else. And what I mean by that is this card has come up a lot for us during different like times in our life where we are repeating the cycle of trying to be a new person. And something I think is really important for especially symptom systems to understand um, is if you think you are a system, stop trying to reinvent yourself. Because if you are a system, you are going to continue to fragment your consciousness in those attempts to change who you are. And I'm saying this based on my own personal experience, not only as somebody with D.I.D and neurodiversity, but somebody who has consistently been practicing chaos magic for shit, okay, at least a decade, maybe 11 years now, at least a decade. Um, so in chaos magic, if you want to change your paradigm, if you want to shift your reality, your outlook, your practice, you would make an effort to do that. Now, you may do that through a ritual where you are imagining you are walking into a different reality. So, like a visualization meditation ritual thing. Okay, you may do that through the use of meditation, visualization, and archetypes where you're stepping into another archetype. You may do that through tulpa work where you are creating a tulpa to aid you in being this new version of yourself, which gets me to another point that I want to talk about. In chaos magic, there is a subset of these, how do I say this? People who do not understand the lived experience of D.I.D and think it's some cool quirky thing and think that tulpamancy is how to get it. Now, let me be clear on this. You can have D.I.D and create tulpas. Tulpas are not altars. Okay? Your imaginary friends are not living in your head as a different identity to yourself. If you think that's going on, you should talk to a trusted therapist, because there are a lot of situations where people think that they're doing, in my experience, I've had a lot of situations where I myself or other people I know who have been doing chaos magic and have had similar experiences to me, where they think they are just doing chaos magic, or they are shifting their identity, or they're doing one thing, but what they're actually doing is they're fragmenting their consciousness. And so if you are a person who thinks this way, I need you to understand two things. Tulpamancy is different from D.I.D. And if you think creating a tulpa is the same as having an altar, you're wrong, and you need to talk to a professional. And two, if you are willing to accept that and you still think that these things that you're talking to are more than something that you created, that's something that's already been in your head, you seriously need to consider talking to a professional that you trust about D.I.D. Because I'm getting really sick and tired of going into these D.I.D. safe spaces and having people say, oh, I have D.I.D. And me being an accepting person, accepting that it can be a self-diagnosis, only to find out that this person does not believe D.I.D. is valid and they're just trying to be a quirky person using tulpamancy magic. It has gotten so bad in the crossover spiritual and like D.I.D. communities, where it is a spiritual community that is safe for D.I.D. people. It has gotten so bad in these communities that I have been in multiple spiritual communities now that I've had to openly state talking about tulpamancy is not allowed anymore, because there are these people who are so convinced that it is as valid as an actual medical trauma condition. There is such an issue in the D.I.D. community already from fake claiming. You do not need to come into this space and start doing this crazy shit. And I do not say crazy to mean in an ableistic way. What I mean is it is inappropriate, it is ableist, it is selfish to come into these spaces that you may or may not be a part of, and then start talking about stuff like you know what you're talking about better than all of these other people who have lived experiences. Okay? It's just not appropriate. I think am I doing that right? Okay, I think I'm doing that right. Is that... Hold on. I couldn't get it to work. I don't know what happened. What I'm trying to say is you're allowed to be creative with your chaos magic. You're allowed to create tulpas. You're allowed to also have D.I.D. All of these things are valid. But people need to stop coming into these spaces that are already a minority, whether it's mental health spaces, racial spaces, mental illness spaces, trauma spaces, magical spaces, and acting like they're there to learn and ask questions if you've already made up your mind. Because if you've already made up your mind, you're not wanting to learn. You're not. If you've already made up your mind, about who you are and what you are, and you already think you know everything, you're not there to learn. You're just not. And it's not fair to the D.I.D community, and it's not fair to the chaos magic community or the Buddhist community, because I forgot to mention that. A lot of these people don't realize that tulpamancy originates from Buddhism. And there is a difference between Buddhist tulpamancy and chaos magic tulpamancy, and the word is used because of a crossover that happened. There was somebody who wrote a book about it who learned from Buddhist culture, and then once it was in the chaos magic space, more people started doing it and changing it and developing it. But now that I've given my opinion and my perspective on what I do know about the situation, I'm going to stop talking about it because I don't know a lot about tulpamancy from that perspective. I only know about it from the perspective that I just shared. And I think it's important to talk about, especially with this idea of martyrdom. There is what a lot of people don't understand about the concept of victim mentality, the idea of it, is it's not what you think it is. And I wanted to talk about the difference between the victim mentality and martyrdom. And I've been struggling to do that and connect it to my other thoughts. So I pulled up the definitions of both of them. Martyrdom is the suffering of death on account of adherence to a cause, and especially one's religious faith. This is the highest level of faith and self-sacrifice that you can do as a Christian or as a Mormon. And like, I'll get back to this in a second, but victim mentality is the belief that you are always a victim, the idea that bad things will always happen to you. The reason I connect these two things together is because of my personal misunderstanding of what victim mentality was, how I experienced that due to my own personal trauma, how I learned what the difference between societal victim mentality is and personal victim mentality due to like mental health versus trauma, and the concept of martyrdom and how that mentality has affected my life, as well as its intersections with addiction and identity. I have several cards here I'm only on the third card, which is the Hangman. And I have several cards here that I wanted to talk about. And the thing that I think really changed my mind and understanding of what a victim mentality is radical acceptance. It is a therapeutic, it is a form of therapy, I guess you could say. I don't know how to explain it because a lot of people talk about radical acceptance from a personal perspective, but it is a therapeutic, I guess, practice or exercise, and it's something that I've had extensive conversations with my therapist about. Okay, here's the thing. I need to adjust my mic because I can hear my fan, and even though I like that, I'm going to be smoking here in a second. So this is going to be like um this is this is this is going to be like right next to the fan. So martyrdom is like very praised in Christian culture and in Mormon culture. And what I think a lot of people fail to understand is um, martyrdom has intersections with victim mentality, because the idea that Mormons have, where we are a peculiar people, people will always hate us, people will always dislike us. You're not a minority. Like you're actually not a minority. There are literally billions of Mormons. The Mormon Church is $1 billion corporation, and lot of like religious ideologies have this belief that they are the minority. Um, and like, here's the thing: if you're in America and you're Christian, you're not the minority. You're not being attacked. You're not being threatened, and neither is your religion. You're not Muslim. You're not you know, from another country. I mean, if you're neither of those things, then you don't have to worry about your religion being attacked. And there are other like religious stuff, other than like Christian and Muslim. That's not what I was saying. I just mean, like, as a magic practitioner myself, as somebody who has left Mormonism and been gone from Mormonism for several years, um, this is just something I see a lot. Is they specifically have problems with Muslim people a lot, um, but they don't have nearly as many complaints about like Jewish people. Like, they understand that other religions exist, but they don't talk about them a lot. But this idea of martyrdom, I think what people really don't understand is you are putting yourself in the position of the victim. Um, what was something I heard? There was something I heard like a while ago where somebody was talking about, if we're all heroes, nobody is. There is this movement or this ideology that's used in fascism. Oh, I know who said it now. There's a creator I watch who was quoting a philosopher. Okay, I know what I'm thinking about now. I just can't remember the name of the creator. So something that fascist movements use is the idea that you can be an everyday hero, that everybody's a hero. Um, and that is like a really big thing in Mormonism. The idea that you are saving people constantly. by doing this or doing that or whatever. It's the savior complex. It's really big in Mormonism. And you're insulating yourself with this identity of the savior, of the mother, of whatever identity is given to you by the religious framework you grew up in, and you're containing that within yourself, but you aren't seeing your actual reflection. I'm gonna get into like some channeling here and like some explaining my thoughts through like the spirituality of the cards themselves and interpreting the cards, because I'm really, really struggling to convey my thoughts in a different way. So, um, when you spend your whole life and generations of your family has spent their whole life in this one place, this one location, this one religion, this one town, this one city, you become very isolated from other spaces. And if you're not willing to venture out further, then that leads you into being a very specific way. Like I said in my last video, a lot of people don't understand that even though a snake is a predator, they themselves are also prey. And if you have spent your entire life with this idea that you are only prey, even though you are fully capable of also being a predator, you end up having that victim mentality. And so, what I'm trying to say is, I feel and I have experienced personally and vicariously, as in like not vicariously, like outwardly looking at other people, that when you grow up in a religion like Mormonism or a very strict version of Christianity, and even in other religions, like if you grow up in any fascistic version of a religion, from my personal experience, especially like the Abrahamic faiths, I haven't seen a lot of like strict versions of a lot of other religions. I know they exist, but I'm not going to speak on what I don't understand. But what I do understand is I have seen a lot of people become an adult and realize I have been thinking this way my entire life. It has insulated me and kept me safe up until this point, because if I didn't think this way, I wouldn't have been accepted by the people around me. But now I need to venture out on my own, and I realize that this is not the reflection I want. This is not the place I want to be. Listen here, little mister. You're not supposed to be in my room. Yes, a man's. Yes, a man. No, you're not. No. You are not supposed to be in here. You are not supposed to be in here. He's so cute. So, I have another example. So something that can happen in D.I.D a lot is your alternates can develop an identity around things that aren't human, like vampires, for instance, which can lead to, um, remember my trigger warning. Um, I might end up talking about SA and SH. So um, you can end up developing a identity that's a vampire, and they may self-harm, um, to like protect themselves in one way emotionally, and then that connection to the blood can create that version of your brain that's a vampire. And it's kind of the same with the hangman. And if you have survived in this particular way your whole life, your identity or identities revolve around this specific way of surviving. And if you want to get out of survival mode and start thriving, you have to change the framework of how your brain works. And in the past, we have the way we did that was just like creating another identity. And that is not healthy for systems. And this is what I was talking about in my last video, is like if you don't realize you're a system and you're just trying to create a new identity like people do sometimes, they want to change, you can end up fracturing your subconscious. I mean, your your consciousness. You can fracture your consciousness further by trying to create a new identity. And so what I have done instead is I have spent time alone with myself, getting to know the parts of myself, listening to them, talking to my therapist, allowing them to be themselves, and bettering our communication and our needs. And that has allowed us to be flexible in how we are living our life and accomplishing our goals. No, you cannot get in the window, you little asshole. You don't look at the chunky boy. Look at the chunky boy. Look at the chunky boy. Hello, baby boy. You are so handsome. Yes, you are. What setting is this? Hello? There we go. Oh my god. So I hate it when this happens because now I will have to edit this video because there was a huge section where I just like wasn't able to say anything. Okay. Okay, hold on. My cat is being a chaos goblin. I got a fucking cat hair in my mouth. God damn it. Oh, gross. Fucking gross. Oh my god. It's disgusting. Can you even hear me? Oh my god. Did you even hear that at all? Oh my god. Okay. So, what you have to do. So, how do you change without continuing to create these alternate versions of yourself? So this section is specifically advice from my personal experience for other systems. Okay. First of all, now my cat is banging on my door. You've got to be kidding me. Bro, stop it. Quit it. Like his food and his food and litter box is out in the living room. So he has no reason to be in here other than wanting to be able to have access to the entire house. And I'm not doing that. So you need to, first of all, actual ASMR break here. Okay. So you need to give time to yourself to get to know yourself, but don't isolate. That's important. Do not isolate yourself. There is a difference between isolating yourself and giving yourself space. And if you do need some occasional isolation or alone time, right? Then you need to be making the people in your life aware of that so they don't worry. So people know about you and what's going on, etc. But I feel like I already kind of talked about the part of the video where I'm like explaining like, oh, this is how not to allow your brain to like continue to create these identities and fracture further. Because here's the thing, to survive as a system, you survive by creating new identities. But once you realize you are a system, you don't necessarily need to do that anymore. That's just like my understanding and my experience. And if because unfortunately I am probably gonna have to edit this video, so if like I keep saying, oh, part 1, part 2, whatever, I'm probably gonna like put in the video like a little note or something. Oopsies. Put in a note or something, so that you know there's not actually 2 parts. And then the next card is 7 of Wands. This deck doesn't really do reverses, but I do reverses. So it's like, in reverse, it's like giving up, destroying confidence, and feeling overwhelmed. But in general, like the upright is perseverance, defending, and maintaining control. Oh my god, that makes so much sense for this part of the video. Okay, so the next part of the video is talking about like surviving and how addiction can sometimes develop as a method of survival. And this is the part in the video where I finally get to smoke my cigarette. Because so there are several addictions in my family generationally. So I'm not gonna say my family is addicted to food, because I know that's possible, but I think people really need to understand that the concept of being addicted to food, a lot of people use that to be fat phobic. And actual addiction to food probably does not look like what you actually think it does. Doesn't actually look like what you think it does. Because like my family members who are overweight or who have a bad relationship with food, it's not because they are addicted to the food itself. So, hold on. I'm trying to find my new lighter. It's really cool. It'll focus. It's like an alien. Okay. So, here's the sitch. Several members of my family on both sides have suffered from nicotine addiction. Multiple generations of my family on several several generations on both sides of my families have suffered with nicotine addiction, sugar addiction, and various other mental illnesses and addictions that kind of relate to control, which is perfect for this card. So a lot of times in my experience and from what I've learned from my family is these addictions develop due to feeling out of control with your life. And I've noticed this for a lot of neurodivergent people as well, including myself. The addiction that I have to nicotine has come from me not being able to emotionally regulate and me feeling like that that version of the what the fuck are we talking about? Hold on, I have to pause. I'm like, we're blurry right now. I have to figure out. We have to figure out if somebody else was gonna switch with me or what's going on. Okay, so I as the host, because I am a fusion of past regular fronting versions of like host adjacent alters, I kind of switch within them. So the way that I would kind of understand and explain this is I, as the host, am one of the alters that has OSDD. Again, as a body, we have D.I.D, but alters within a system can have OSDD, and that subsystems don't always look the same. Subsystems themselves are also spectrums, and so because of our experience with gender, the way that I developed, I'm made up of multiple alters that identify within the gender spectrum in a different way, as well as identify with the world in a different way. So what I was saying before is that a lot of this lack of control came from not being able to emotionally regulate. And in order to survive, once we started using nicotine, it became something we had to do. So what happened to me is I was having a mental health crisis. Trigger warning. Gonna talk about it a little bit. I was dealing with some suicidal ideation. And a lot of it was coming from continuing to be prescribed antipsychotics that I didn't need, and them causing me issues. And so I went off of them, and then I was having issues, but I didn't understand where they were coming from because I didn't know enough about myself, and I didn't know how to validate myself at that time. I didn't know how to communicate with ourselves at the time because we were still going through one of our, cycles of denial. And so I ended up having some psychosis, and a part of that was because I was put on another antipsychotic that I didn't need because, again, these people that were supposed to be helping me were not listening to me. And I feel like that also connects back to this idea of victim mentality and acknowledging that medical misogyny exists and that there is just as many bad people in the medical and mental health practice as there is in the rest of the world can sometimes lead to these ideas of being a victim and feeling out of control of your life, and that can also lead to not being able to emotionally regulate, right? And so when I was in the psych ward, the only way that was really helping me regulate was we had several outdoor breaks. And I went from smoking only socially to smoking half a pack a day, if not more, because you can smoke up to 2 cigarettes every outdoor break and multiple breaks. I would end up smoking like half a pack or more a week. I was there for about 2 weeks, give or take. And I smoked a lot while I was there, and then I continued smoking afterwards, and that is kind of what led it to becoming an addiction for me. And I've been through several cycles of quitting and being off of it for several months. and being consistent with the nicotine gum and then completely going off nicotine, only to be in a situation where I still don't have the necessary skills to emotionally regulate and relax. And so I have had to go back to smoking, or I have felt like I have had to go back to smoking. And when you have when you have generational addiction, when you have neurodivergency, which is also genetic, right? So when you have generational addiction, when you have neurodivergency, and then you mix that with trauma, it's a lot easier to get addicted and that help you survive. So part of that radical acceptance is accepting that and paying attention to your patterns and allowing them to happen and observing them. And once you accept those things, you can then change them. But you have to fully accept them. And I heard about radical acceptance all the time. You know, it's one of those things that's mentioned a lot in New Age spirituality, in the tarot community, in motivational communities, in self-help, all these things, but I wasn't really able to apply it and use it until I was going to therapy on a regular basis and talking about my lived experience and being validated by a professional. And even though I was on a journey of already learning to validate myself and accept myself, it wasn't really until I fully cut off my parents and my family that I was actually able to get to a point where not only was I able to radically accept myself, but I am more in control of my life. But part of that is having the flexibility and understanding that addictions aren't necessarily something that you can control. You can control your willpower, and you can gain these skills to emotionally regulate. But once you have an addiction, once you've made the decision to pick that thing up, and then it becomes an addiction, you no longer have control of that aspect. And part of the acceptance is accepting the responsibility that you made that decision, and that now this is something that you have to deal with. And managing that addiction and getting to a point where you can change that is a process, and it's not always going to be linear. Now, there are always ways that you can get help for yourself, that you can help yourself, like AA, therapy, nicotine gum, other coping mechanisms like journaling, things like that. But you also need to not judge yourself if you feel like you're in a position where survival is like, part of surviving is having that addiction. And that's a lot easier to do and say and deal with when it's things like nicotine, because there are other addictions that are a lot more harmful. Not to say that nicotine isn't harmful, it is. But hopefully what I'm trying to say is making sense. And a lot of it just has to come down to, again, personal willpower and making a decision to stop. And when you already feel out of control of the world, sometimes addictions are the only thing that make you feel in control. But the cost of that version of control is your health. And so it's very important to have flexibility in terms of self-acceptance and loving yourself when you do have those relapses where you're going back to the addiction, but also being willing to understand that that addiction is not necessary. And I'm trying my best to explain this from my personal perspective and not make it sound like I know exactly what I'm talking about, because I am not an addiction specialist. I'm just trying to share my experience as someone who has struggled the past several years with these issues, and how becoming addicted to nicotine has helped me survive, but also made my life harder, and be honest about what that has looked like. And the obvious thing that people say is just don't do it. Don't even pick it up to begin with. And unfortunately, if you don't understand how important that is, if you don't get that, and you think that you'll be fine and you pick it up, it's gonna be an aspect for the rest of your life. One of the things that I do is I constantly keep nicotine gum around, and I will chew it until the nicotine is gone, and then I will keep it around, and I will continue to chew it even when there's no nicotine in it, because part of why it is an addiction for me, part of why it is emotional regulation for me, is the oral fixation. This gum doesn't have nicotine in it anymore, or at least not a lot. But that action helps me. Another one of the important conclusions that I've come to in terms of accepting myself and what I want for my life is realizing I wrote it down, so I was talking about this a little earlier. This relates to not only acceptance but authenticity, which is strangers, bitches, and assholes. I kind of use these words interchangeably. Are going to judge you either way. And so you might as well be yourself. They might as well be judging the real me than the fake me. And I think that really relates to the idea of control and victim mentality, because a lot of people who grow up in these very strict religious or academic environments is they feel like managing other people's perception of who they are gives them a level of safety, and to an extent that is very true. But when you are living based on survival instincts and what like a lot of people term to be your animal or your reptile brain, then you are not allowing yourself to evolve and thrive in a better life, in the life you desire. So So that kind of leads me to my next point, which is I've had to learn to get to a point where I have stopped taking myself so seriously. But that is not the same thing as not having self-respect, because a part of the process of stopping taking yourself so seriously is allowing yourself the flexibility of learning what loving yourself and respecting yourself looks like. Which leads to my next card, the Emperor. So, the Emperor upright is let me find it. So upright, it is authority, structure, control, fatherhood, or masculinity. But reversed, it is tyranny, rigidity, and coldness. So you have to learn how to bend and not break. You have to learn this resilience and, again, this flexibility. A lot of my spiritual flexibility and stuff like that, I feel, has been really benefited by my worship deity work with the goddess Amphitrite, which is Poseidon's wife, and she is a goddess of the sea, dolphins, porpoises. I also consider her to be like the goddess of whales and sharks and things like that. And she's also the goddess of flexibility, motherhood, and by default, she is a goddess of the moon and the seasons. That's how I see it. This is my personal gnosis, okay? I prefer working with gods and goddesses that don't have a lot of information about them, because I feel like it allows you to develop your own personal gnosis a lot easier. And a lot of like that, it goes back to my other what I was saying earlier in the first part of this, which was learning how to accommodate myself and the radical acceptance of my patterns. And so for I'm talking the past 2 years, I had to just allow myself to get up every day and do whatever I felt called to doing, and slowly make progress with my goals and my thing, like my stuff in life that I wanted to do. I had to do it very slowly. And by allowing myself to just exist, we were able to learn trust within our body, learn about our limitations, learn about how to trust ourselves. And it was this long process of learning to listen to our body and ourself, and that allows us the flexibility and self-love to trust each other to make decisions as a system. Which makes us the authority and expert on our own life, right? Because that's what I feel like led to a lot of me caring about what other people think, is the years of not being allowed to authentically be me, and constantly be told that I had to care about other people's perception of me instead of what I thought about myself. And so I've had to learn how to reverse that. Like, I need to care more about what I think than what other people think. Because if you care too much about what other people think, you are taking yourself too seriously. You are caring too much about other people's perception and the masks that you're wearing to fit in, to exist, to survive, instead of navigating the world in a way that's authentic to you. So, like, if taking yourself seriously is a detriment, is not allowing yourself to be flexible. And self-respect is allowing yourself to be flexible, then like what it, don't be looking at my feet. Then what is self-respect within flexibility? What does that look like? I'll get to that. So we've got the Five of Swords here. Word associations are unbridled ambition, win at all costs, sneakiness, lingering resentment, desire to reconcile, and forgiveness. So self-respect, how I feel like that connects is you are no longer self-sacrificing for the ability to win other people's affection. You're no longer sacrificing yourself to get ahead in a life that you don't even want. You are forgiving yourself or yourselves for things that you've done in the past, and you're taking accountability for the mistakes that you have made, and you are severing the idea that to exist in the life that you want, you have to have full control of the circumstances. You are detaching, as they say. Which leads me to like this idea of like, what is detachment and how does that like connect to self? Hello? 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 There we go. Can you hear me? Okay. So, how does detachment, self respect, not taking yourself seriously, and like self radical acceptance, how do these things connect, right? So, I'm going to draw a card to help myself explain this. Hello? 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 Okay, so I'm too far away. Hold on. Okay, can you hear me? Can you, oh my God. Hold on. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, so you can kind of hear me now. Let me shuffle these. Here we go. Wow. Okay, that's funny. That's very funny to me. I got the Fool. Okay, so the reason I find this interesting is this leads me to a topic that I'm very, very passionate about, and that is jesters, like court jesters. They are very misunderstood and misrepresented in today's society. So the archetype of the Fool is very connected to the archetype of the jester. And what people do not understand is a lot of times people will connect the archetype of the clown, the jester, the pantomime, the bard-esque archetypes together as one. This could not be further from the truth. And the reason that is because the jester is not an idiot. They are not slapstick. They are not stupid. The clown is slapstick, stupid humor. The clown is a modern day interpretation of these bard-esque archetypes. And the clown, this word clown, is associated with a very specific entertainment archetype that exists because of minstrelsy. And minstrelsy is the period of time in history and entertainment where an entertainment genre was created called minstrelsy. And this entertainment industry was exclusively created in America during the time of slavery to make fun of Black people and discredit them and their intelligence. The idea of this slapstick humor where these people are so stupid they can't understand anything is from minstrelsy to make fun of Black people. The clown that we have today is verbatim, directly inspired by blackface. It is a reverse of that. Literally, if you look at the original clowns and you compare them to blackface, minstrelsy, makeup, and entertainment, they are literally verbatim, directly inspired. The makeup, the clothing, everything. It was not until later that the clown started becoming associated with these other entertainment archetypes. And it is incredibly important to me that people understand this, because to equate the clown with the jester, I believe, is an intentional anti-intellectualism movement within fascistic white supremacy. And I am trying to choose my words very clearly so that people understand this, because the jester is not an idiot. They are not a fool. They are not a comedian. They are an important political fixture in the societies that they existed around, and their specific job was to be a diplomatic political figure that connected the needs of the people to the ruling class and were the voice of the people to keep the ruling class in check and not become tyrannical. And eventually, I hope to make an actual, full video essay about this topic. But the reason I think it's important to explain that is a lot of people think that the fool is, they associate the fool with new beginnings and innocence. And this is to be foolish, to be ignorant, and then to associate that with this jester is incorrect, because, and I know that not everyone considers the fool archetype the same as a jester, but a lot of the depictions that I have seen in tarot cards, especially the one that was commissioned by Pamela Smith for the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, is very clearly inspired by the jester. And all inspirations from that deck that I have seen that are trying to create a similar style, or create a similar deck but in an individual style, they tend to be they tend to also be very jester inspired. And jesters were very important diplomatic political figures. They could go unseen and untouched by the ruling class because the ruling class did not take them seriously, because they were using the mask of the entertainment to comment on the differences and discrepancies within the class systems at the time. And I think it's just really important that people understand that the adaptation and the evolution of clowns they're different now than they used to be, but to equate them as being the same thing is very misguided, and I believe it is deeply rooted in anti-intellectualism, because it's just not true. Jesters cannot be the fool. They may wear the mask of the fool, but they cannot be the fool. They cannot be ignorant, because literally it is part of the job to be aware of the political climate of the countries around the country that they are in, as well as the culture and how to communicate with the other cultures outside of the one that they currently live in. There were two types of jesters, and you could have a job as a jester and be like any gender, presentation, or sex. But there were two types of jesters. There were born jesters. That particular job was offered to disabled people who were typically born with a physical deformity or physically obvious disability that wouldn't allow them to, at the time, contribute to society in a typical way. And so that job was offered to them. And you know, it wasn't always offered to disabled people intentionally. Sometimes if a royal was born with a physical disability, they were just given that job to give them something to do. But typically what would happen is there would be a royal court jester master. And then if you wanted that job for a different place, like for an example, let's say the king and the queen, there was a jester in their court. And in that kingdom, he was the master jester, kind of like a master blacksmith, right? So what someone could do, let's say if there was a family nearby that was very wealthy in their particular town or area, and they wanted to be sponsored by that family, what they could do is they could go apprentice with this master jester, and they would get house and board and pay for their schooling. And then they would, once they had their, you know, their schooling, they could then be the court jester for that aristocratic family. And you don't have to always have the same qualifications as another jester does. Like, you could play a different instrument than them, but there was multiple jobs, multiple types of skills that you had to have to be in the trade of a jester, because that's what a lot of people don't understand. It was not just an entertainer. They were not nomads. They were messengers. So if they were traveling, it was usually to deliver a message. So they would have physical entertainment skills, like let's say juggling or gymnastics or things like that, but they would also possess a instrumental or musical ability that they would either build up or that they were naturally talented in, that they would then, you know, become very skilled in. They also had to understand maps, navigation, again, cultural, political climates, as well as having to have communication skills with the servants, the people, the aristocrats, because it was their job to know about gossip and what was going on within the kingdom, not only politically, but socially, so that they could appropriately joke about things and go unseen, while also keeping the rich in check, so that the people had a voice in the court. And so to have the fool in this place of like learning to respect yourself but not taking yourself seriously is the jester. Like what like the actual job entailed was you had to know your worth. You had to be educated, but you had to be willing to let people think that you were dumb and foolish and didn't know what you were talking about. And that gave you a level of safety. In fact, in some time periods and in some kingdoms, it was actually a crime to assault or do anything to a jester. In fact, one of the props that a jester would carry around was a cane with a caricature of of their character, because their uniform had, like, all of them had a particular style of uniform, but it could be any color, any pattern, and they would develop their own character. So they would be separate from their character. So when they went to work, they would have a character, right? And their cane would have their character, their brand, as you say, on it. And this cane that they carried around, literally, they used to hit rich people in the head. If you were acting up, you could be hit in the head by a jester. Literally, they were the only lower class person that had the authority to physically punish the rich. Like, it was a very, very important job. And so, like, I really don't think people understand how nuanced it was. And it's one of my biggest hyper fixation special interests. Like, it is a very big hyper fixation for me. I think about it all the time. I talk about it all the time. I talk to people about it all the time because it bothers me so deeply that it is not common knowledge. Because the death of the jester as a job was such a detriment to society, to politics, to governments, that there are several poems, paintings, and stories, even centuries after this job died, talking about the effect it had on society, and like how people stopped having a voice. Like, it's not that tyrants never existed while the role was there, but it literally, as a role, existed to force accountability on the upper class. And so, like, for the fool to show up in this part of the conversation makes a lot of sense to me, because in order for you to have self-respect but also stop taking yourself seriously, is you have to be flexible as a person to the point where you understand your worth and you understand what you deserve. You have the ability to respect yourself enough that if somebody is not respecting you and they're trampling all over your boundaries, that you will walk away, that you will leave. You have to be in a space where, again, you are willing to accept that other people's perception of you may be inaccurate, that they may think you're stupid or crazy or foolish. But you know that you deserve respect. You know that you've worked hard to get to where you are. You know that you are educated. And you know that you don't know everything and you're like willing to continue to learn, but you have the self authority to stand on business, stand on values, and stand on boundaries. So let's see. I really think that I got everything. And unfortunately I think I will have to edit this video, and I know I said that already, but I'm really proud of myself. And I hope that other systems and other neurodivergent people who find this are able to take what resonate and leave what doesn't, and are able to be helped by my personal experiences and thoughts. And I really hope that y'all have a good day and a good night. And I wish you nothing but the best.